Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Entrepreneur Expat. I'm Justin,
And I'm Amanda.
and today we're here to talk to you about the pros and the cons of living in Mexico.
We're both currently living in Guadalajara, Mexico. We did a whole other video on why we chose Guadalajara, so we recommend checking that one out first if you haven't done it yet. Because in this video, we'll be talking about the good side of living in Mexico and the not so good side about living in Mexico. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to subscribe because we have new content coming out every single week to help entrepreneur expats and aspiring entrepreneur expats.
Yep, so let's get right into it. The first pro of living in Mexico is that life here feels so much less stressful and so much more laid back than in other parts of the world, especially North America, like the US and Canada. Granted, we are technically in North America, but what most people consider to be North America, specifically the English speaking North America. I find that the US, where I've lived the majority of my life, has a much faster pace of life. It's much more stressful there. You're dealing with things like rush hour traffic. Um, you're dealing with things like people being a lot of the times just way more
Anxious.
anxious, uptight, uh, kind of in each other's, what's the word? Uh,
Each other's what?
in each other's space, but not necessarily in a good way. It's kind of like everybody competing for
Yeah.
resources, for status, for money, and it's kind of the zero sum game that you experience a lot in the U.S. and in a lot of other parts that one might consider to be the West.
And I'm from Miami, which if anybody's ever been to Miami, and I mean real Miami, not South Beach, if anybody's ever been to Miami, you know it's mostly Latinos, so it feels a little bit different than the rest of the United States. Miami has more of a Latin Caribbean vibe to it, but it still has that undercurrent of constant stress and anxiety, which my parents being Cuban, most Latino immigrants to the United States, it's one of the first things that they notice is how anxious Americans are. And a lot of Latin comedians in the United States make jokes about how in Latin America, Latinos are like super chill, but then as soon as they get to the United States, everyone becomes an asshole because life in the US can be very stressful.
Absolutely. And in Mexico, we just don't experience the same type of stress that we did in the US. People are more chill here. They're nicer, which we'll get to a little bit later on, but um, it just feels like a much more kind of energizing, calm. How else would you describe it, Amanda?
Chill.
Just very, very chill in comparison to where we've lived in the US.
Yeah. So I would say the next pro to living in Mexico is cost of living. Now, obviously, at the time of recording this, I think how do you say it? Because when I was talking to my dad, he said I did it wrong, where it's like the conversion, right? So like one Mexican peso is equivalent of 18 US dollars right now.
The other way
Like
around,
it's the other
yeah,
way
right.
around.
Currently, today, as it stands in October, nearing the end of 2023, we're
Oh,
at about
got it.
18
Yes.
pesos
18
per
pesos
dollar,
per
right?
dollar. Okay, I got it now. Right. So, obviously cost of living, the dollar goes a lot further in Mexico. But I would also argue that Mexico is also just a better value
Hmm.
than other places where you might have a lower cost of living, but you won't have as high of a quality of life as you can in several places in Mexico. One place that comes to mind is Costa Rica. It's way more expensive than Mexico, and you just don't get as many of the benefits.
That is absolutely correct. The cost of living here is just so much lower than in the US. For example, we live in a three-story house here with about five rooms. I don't know what if you count the studio as a room, but somewhere between four and five rooms. It's so big we've lost count of how many rooms
We
and
play Marco
bathrooms.
Polo in the
We
house.
actually do, or sometimes Amanda will need to tell me something and she'll call me and I'll be in a different floor and she doesn't know where I am, so she'll text me or call me. I'm like, babe, I'm right over here. But uh yeah, we have more space than we know what to do with, although now we're going to be building an actual video studio downstairs. This is my office here, but we're going to be building a video studio downstairs because we have all the space there, in addition to a guest room upstairs, in addition to our own offices and a living area and kitchen. Um, we have so much space here in Guadalajara, walking distance from everything, and we're only paying $900 roughly a month in rent. US dollars, that is. And so it's
Granted, that is not typical, because we just got a really good deal. But I think what's more typical and what people expect more, or if you come to Guadalajara, what you will see more of is like you can get one bedroom apartments for about that much,
depending on the area, yeah.
depending on the area. I mean, a lot of it depends on the area, and also, as we learned, who you know.
Hmm. We got really lucky because we were able to find this place at probably a lot less than market rate. It came with its issues. We had a lot of things to fix, but now that's
We'll get to
finally
that in the
done.
con section. Don't worry, that's coming.
But yeah, great value for your money for sure. Now, the third thing that we really, really love about Mexico is just how developed it is. A lot of the time, when Westerners like us, especially, think about Latin America or Mexico in particular, they think, oh, well, it's just, dirt roads and
Desert and border
desert
towns
and little
or
border
beaches.
towns, or a couple beach towns. And when you're in Guadalajara, for instance, or in Mexico City, or in a lot of the other, I mean, there's another few big cities in Mexico, but you don't feel like you're in Mexico. It's almost more like a European vibe. There's skyscrapers. There's also single family homes. There's apartments. There's a lot of like industry, commerce, shopping centers. It's actually quite developed. We even have pretty nice freeways now. So in between towns, you've got like four-lane divided freeways with controlled access. Some of them are toll roads, some of them are free.
That might depend on what part of Mexico you're in, because when I was in Chiapas a few years ago, that was definitely not the case.
Yeah.
So it might depend what part of Mexico you're in, but for the most part, yes, Mexico is very developed.
Yeah, and there's infrastructure here. The internet in a lot of ways is actually even better than in the US because the US is so spread out and they're using so many legacy systems for the internet and other infrastructure here. Most of the big cities are connected with very, very, very high quality, high speed fiber optics. We have fiber optic internet. We're paying almost nothing for it, and it's at least as good, if not better, than anything that I've ever had in the US. It's almost a gigabyte each way. So, um, good infrastructure, very well developed. Roads are actually starting to be quite nice. Americans have this whole concept, and it's actually
Americans think Mexico is like a third world
I was gonna
country,
say
and it's
exactly
not at
that.
all.
And that
Yeah.
was just a term that was invented actually during, I believe it was the Cold War when we were talking about the countries that were associated with the Soviet bloc. It doesn't really even apply to Latin America, definitely not now, but it's kind of that legacy wording that Americans still think about. Oh, it's this an underdeveloped place, it's a third world country, whatever, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. And in fact, I would argue that that's probably something even that could be propagated by perhaps the government or perhaps other people that,
Don't want
frankly,
Americans to leave.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so they put a lot of fuel behind that. In addition to the media always talking about the uh, lack of safety in Latin America and all those other things. And we actually don't have this on our list, but I'll mention this kind of as a bonus. It's actually quite safe here. All you hear in the US are reports of like cartel violence, reports of kidnapping in the border towns. And does that happen on occasion? Sure. Are there parts of the country that are really subject to violence from the cartels? Absolutely. Uh, do you need to worry about that typically in a big city, in a nice neighborhood as a tourist? No. If you look at even big cities like Cancun or like Playa del Carmen, or like Playa del Carmen is still a growing city, but Cancun's a pretty big city. You have heard occasional reports of things like violent crime, but compared to the millions and millions of people that go there each year to visit, that number is very, very, very low overall. And in places like Guadalajara, you don't really see or hear about anything like that at all. Like if it does happen, it's very, very rare and it makes the news and it's like people that were into the wrong kinds of things got kind of caught in the crossfire. But if you're here, you're minding your own business, you're fairly safe.
Yeah, it's like anything. Just like in the United States, there's certain neighborhoods you wouldn't go to. Same thing here.
Hmm.
And also, I would argue that in Mexico, I don't have to worry about going to the movie theater or a grocery store and somebody shooting the place up. So, I mean, it's just a different kind of crime that you're dealing with and a different kind of violence. And there's no perfect thing. Mexico has its issues with security and crime, but for the most part, I've never felt unsafe here. Okay, so the next one we're highlighted underscore 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 on this one is the healthcare in Mexico. Now, there have been a lot of news stories lately and a lot of news pieces lately about medical tourism in Mexico. Now, I'm from Miami. Like I mentioned, Miami has a very big Latino population. Half of Miami has flown to Latin America every year to get vision, to get dental work, to get plastic surgery, and to go see their doctors. So I already knew this, but I had not yet experienced it for myself. There's literal towns in Mexico that are completely full of dentists to cater to American tourists who cannot afford dental work in the United States because it's insane. So they just come to Mexico and pay out of pocket, and it's like a third of the price.
Or they realize that it's just much better value here for what
Yeah.
you do pay. I'll give you an example, and this actually was before I had moved back to Mexico. I was still in Colombia, and my mother needed a bunch of different treatments on her teeth. She needed like some implants done. One of them was like a bridge. There was just a bunch of work that she needed. Her teeth were pretty in pretty bad shape. So I was living in Medellin at the time in Colombia, and she paid a total of maybe 2,500 US dollars, roughly. Added another 500 for the actual trip, but she was also visiting me. But for $3,000 all in, she was able to get, including the transportation, she was able to get what probably in the US would have been 15 to $20,000 of dental treatment, maybe even more. In Mexico, while not as cheap as Colombia, it's still very, very, very reasonable for those kinds of things with healthcare. You could get a tooth filled if you need a filling for 20 to $40 depending on where you go, perhaps even cheaper. A root canal might only be a couple hundred, whereas in the States, you're
Getting your
talking,
wisdom teeth out is
yeah,
all of them together is probably a few $100s, whereas in the States it's easily
thousands.
it's
Oh,
thousands.
yeah, at
It's
least
1000s
3 or 4 thousand.
in the United States. Eye care is another thing that a lot of Americans come to Mexico for. We have an eye doctor who literally did house calls.
Yep.
House calls, right? Came to, our Airbnb when we were living there, and then, when we finally found a place to live, he's just like, "Cool, I'll go like right over." And I mean, between the two of us, it cost maybe with everything the two of us got, and I got contacts.
And
Um,
glasses.
and glasses. Glasses had all the bells and whistles. His glasses also had all the bells and whistles, the blue light stuff,
Blue
new
light
frames,
blocking,
everything.
transition lenses,
Transition
everything.
lenses, plus a house call, plus in my case, they needed to make some adjustments to the glasses afterwards. So there was another house call and some adjustments. All of that together cost us half of what my last eye doctor appointment cost me in the United States.
Yeah, what was it total? Like 200, $300,
Yeah,
something like
like
that.
maybe $300 between
Yeah.
the two of us. And the last time I went to the eye doctor in the United States to buy the same stuff, by the way, it's the same brands. It's not like there's like cheap brands here or different brands. Same brands. Last time I went to the US between the eye doctor appointment and all the stuff I needed to get was almost $1,000.
And the quality here arguably is significantly better because they're doing house calls, they're much more responsive, you're able to actually get appointments. I've waited in the US
Months.
months, yeah,
Yeah.
weeks or months to get just an appointment to see a doctor or to see a specialist because frankly, the healthcare system there is it's horrific.
Here
Even if
it's
you have
quick.
money to pay for health
Yeah.
insurance there, it's really bad. Here, I pay about I want to say like 13 or $1,400 a year, depending on the exchange rate, for private health insurance, low deductible, almost unlimited coverage, and it includes everything and coverage outside of Mexico. And that same health insurance plan, were it not to be subsidized, let's say by taxpayer dollars in the U.S., that would be at least 3, 4, $5,000 a year or more.
that's better than the health insurance because I'm not a
Oh, much better.
much better
Health
than the
insurance
healthcare
here.
I have in the United
Yeah.
States. Because I mean, my healthcare like full price in the US right now is like 400 or 500 bucks a month, and I'm not getting that level of
That's
care.
for an
And
HMO
that's for an
where you have to
HMO.
go first to a doctor, then
Yeah,
get a
then you gotta
referral.
wait, then it's a whole
Yeah.
thing, and he's getting private health insurance. And this is really interesting. You can WhatsApp your doctors
Hmm.
in Mexico. And I've heard in other parts of Latin America it's the same, right? Where it's like, oh, I have an issue with my prescription. Let me just WhatsApp my doctor, right? Which brings us to the next point in terms of a pro of Mexico. Everything gets resolved via WhatsApp, including prescriptions, including doctors, handymen, restaurants, like literally everything you could think of gets resolved via WhatsApp.
You don't have to waste your time calling people back, leaving voicemails, waiting to get a call back. You have WhatsApp open on your computer and you have whatever opinions you want about WhatsApp and about Meta. That's a conversation for another video. But it's kind of amazing that people are accessible, they respond back to you, and you can have much better asynchronous communication. It feels like in that sense, the US is kind of like left in the 20th
Well, because you're
century.
dealing with more bots, like chat bots
Hmm.
in the US and here in
And
Mexico,
phone
and
trees
phone
and
trees and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
And here in Mexico, you just send a little WhatsApp and the problem's going to get solved. So I think the next one, and we're both really big on this one, is the food quality in
The
Mexico
food is so
is
much
superior.
better here. So much better.
The fruit tastes like
Fresher.
fruit.
Yeah. Much fresher fruit and vegetables. Uh, much cheaper food. You don't have to necessarily even look for organic, although they have a lot of organic food. The default is the chickens are relatively happy. I mean, I know we had the joke where we're like, I think the store's out of the out of the
The
happy
happy
chickens
eggs.
today, out
The
of the
happy
happy eggs. We're
eggs.
gonna
We're
have
gonna
to
go
get
get the
some,
sad
yeah,
eggs.
we're gonna have to go get some sad eggs today for breakfast. But the quality of farms here, the quality of food that's produced, the lack of this like in
Crap in the
the
food.
crap in the food, the antibiotics and the hormones and all this stuff. You still have some of that for sure, but it's nowhere near as widespread as it is in the US. In the US, you need to pay double or triple if you want to get decent quality food that's not totally processed beyond recognition. And here it almost seems like the default. It's just much fresher, it's much better quality. It's not as altered with all these artificial things. And you don't need to eat as much to feel satiated. You don't need to eat as much food to feel full because
It has nutrients.
it's actually, yeah, it's actually nutritious. They don't take the nutrients out or create food through processes that eliminate the nutrients from the beginning and then put a bunch of artificial coloring in the food so that it seems like it's nutritious. It's actually good for you. And there's so many like local food places, bakeries that make things literally right in front of your eyes. We have a
Tortilleria.
tortilleria, like a
Tortilleria.
tortilla, what do you call it?
Uh,
Bakery,
Bakery,
tortilla
I
bakery,
guess.
I guess,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. And you actually see the tortillas being made right there before your eyes. Maybe we'll do some,
Our
uh,
neighbor gets avocados from a local farm, like in the
yeah,
outside of
yeah.
Guam.
You could get farms to deliver to
You can
you,
get farms to deliver to
and you
you,
can do that in the U.S. sometimes, but you're paying
but you're paying an arm
hundreds and
and a
hundreds and
leg.
hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
expensive here to do that at all. And I would also say, in terms of food, this is something I noticed in the grocery store that a lot of the food is from Mexico. So one of the things that always grinded my gears in the US is I would go to the supermarket in Florida and I would be looking for oranges and it would say oranges from Brazil. And I'm like, what? That makes no sense. We're
don't we make
literally,
them here?
don't we
Like,
make oranges in Florida? Like, this makes no sense to me.
yeah,
So there's a lot less of that from my experience. That's just what I noticed in the grocery store. It's everything's from Mexico. It's just traveling less distances, which is probably why it tastes fresher.
that's definitely one of the reasons. Yeah. So last but definitely not least,
In terms of pros.
in terms of pros is that the people here are just amazing. I've met some of the nicest, friendliest, um, kind-hearted people living in Mexico because the culture here is just, I don't know, it's so much more conducive
It's
to,
warmer.
it's
It's
warmer,
warmer.
it's more conducive to really just building genuine connections with people. I do feel like in the US, you're in this just massive competition for money, for status, for fame, for whatever it is that they do, keeping up with the Joneses, a better car. And I played that game. I mean, I was making six figures at 20 years old. I had a brand new Audi. Um, I made a lot of other bad financial mistakes, which led to several issues along the line, and then eventually I learned that it's not all about how much money you have. It's not all about this whole like status playing game. It's about the genuine quality of people that you surround yourself with, and that really influences us on a day to day more than almost anything else because where in the US do you go and walk into the corner grocery
And
store?
they know your name.
They know your name, they know your dog's name, the
They
coffee
literally
shop.
ask for Daisy. Like I went
Yeah.
to a coffee shop around the corner today and they're like, "Where's Daisy?" They even remember your dog's name.
Hmm.
Yeah, because you build like a real relationship and a genuine connection with people. Or I was outside with Daisy yesterday and one of our neighbors walked by with her kid and she goes, "Look, it's Daisy."
Yeah.
Or that neighbor, I guess Daisy had already met her. I had not met that neighbor yet. And she's like, "Welcome to the neighborhood. If you need anything, we're a couple of doors down."
Daisy likes to take herself out for walks
Yeah,
sometimes.
well, yeah. Daisy's very self-sufficient.
She is. She's a very independent
She's a
dog.
very independent dog, but it people are much warmer here. Or we were at a birthday party last night for our holistic health practitioner, which actually is a pro that we did not mention in terms of the healthcare. They do a lot more natural medicine
Yeah.
in Mexico because they kept that alive in the families, right? So they'll be like, "Oh yeah, my grandma has a book of like
Herbal
tea, herbal
medicines.
medicine or
Yeah.
teas or plants." So it's not unusual to get a combination of like allopathic medicine here with more holistic medicine. It's not unusual, it's not weird, and it's not inaccessible
Hmm.
either. Like in the United States, that stuff tends to be
Oh, I
inaccessible.
had a chiropractor who was also, he was like a homeopathic doctor and chiropractor. Every every appointment that I went to would be like $100 to $150. Then on top of that, you're probably spending 50 to a hundred
God knows
dollars
how
at
much with
least on
supplements.
supplements. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that adds up. So call it, $200 a month, $300 a month, just seeing a natural medicine doctor in the US. Here, every session is about 15, roughly 15, $20.
And that
That
includes the
includes the
supplements.
the the drops,
The
yeah.
drops and the
Mhm.
supplements. So that's actually a pro that we forgot to mention in terms of healthcare is that it's not crazy to get natural medicine in combination with allopathic medicine. It's not as unusual here. It's actually quite common. And then, well, anyway, back to my point in terms of people, our holistic health practitioner, it was his birthday this week, so we did like a surprise birthday party and they were going around saying thank you, and one of the things that I said was like, well, thank you because I pretty much just got here. And everybody's already accepted me like a member of the family. No one's treated me like un extranjero or una extranjera. No one's treated me like a foreigner. No one's
Yeah.
treated me like I don't belong. Everybody's been very warm, very friendly, very excited that we're living in their city and that we're really enjoying it. Granted, we do integrate very well, so that probably helps. Um,
Speaking Spanish helps
Speaking
for
Spanish
sure.
also helps a lot, but the people have been very warm, very friendly. You actually know your neighbors. You actually see them. People actually smile at you in the street and say hi. I know in the United States, I will smile and say hi to someone and they look at me like I'm crazy.
It's true, and I don't understand why. It makes me sad, to be honest, that that
Yeah,
happens.
you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so those,
But here people are extremely friendly.
yeah, here people are extremely friendly. So those are the pros. Now let's get into the cons.
So con number one, and this actually kind of is the flip side to the very laid back culture that we have here in Mexico. So on one hand, it's good that things are laid back. It's not as fast paced. There isn't as much of this kind of dog eat dog mentality. But on the flip side, the kind of dark side, if you will, of that is that it's very hard in a lot of cases to get things done
Efficiently.
efficiently. Here's an example.
Things will get done. They just
Yeah.
may not get done efficiently.
Here's an example. Contractors. So we've moved into this place. We need a lot of repairs done, electric work, plumbing work, uh, little carpentry details, things like that. And it's very, very difficult to lock somebody down in terms of actually saying that they're going to be there at a certain time and having them show
Mañana,
up.
mañana,
Mañana.
which means tomorrow, but they don't actually come.
That's the
Mañana. It's
equivalent
like
to
2 weeks later.
that's the
They're still on
equivalent to like
mañana.
Costa Rica's
Pura vida.
pura vida mentality. Here they just say mañana,
Mañana.
mañana, mañana, and it you would think that it means tomorrow because that is the literal translation, but mañana means
Maybe
someday, maybe when
someday.
I get around to it, if I don't
Yeah.
have any other appointments, I'll see you probably after 5 p.m., even though they say that they're going to be there tomorrow at 9 a.m. That's not going to happen. If you have a plumber or someone that says, "Yeah, creo que puedo mañana. I think I can make it tomorrow." It means that they have absolutely no idea when in their schedule they're going to be able to fit you in. So you probably should follow up a lot. And maybe by this time next week, they're going to come. So if you have an emergency, you'd best be learning uh, plumbing or electrical work yourself, just like I have. I've got a couple cuts on my hand from this day's festivities, running some more wires to finish our house. But uh, so that is a challenge, getting things done. Uh, to that point, there's also a lot of bureaucracy, and so it's kind of a similar thread there. Getting a visa sometimes takes a lot more time. You need to stand in line. You need to wait around. You gotta wait, send one receipt to this place and then pay at another register for your cell phone bill and then take it to the first person that you talk to. And it's kind of between being laid back and sometimes
Painfully inefficient.
painfully inefficient. It's sometimes hard to get things done at the standard and with the efficiency that you might expect in the West. So that's one thing to be aware of.
I would say another thing is that networking opportunities are different because it's a different economy. It's a different type of system. My understanding is that Mexico has recently, I mean, at least during the pandemic, it seems like it was very pro-business because it stayed open. And my understanding was they didn't want to shut down the country because they knew it would be detrimental economically. And they were right because Mexico's been booming
Yep.
since then, which is one of the reasons why more people are moving here. But it is a different kind of economic system. I think it's one thing to be like, hey, I'm gonna go network with American expats. We're gonna go have like a coffee morning type thing on a Wednesday with all these other Americans and Canadians. But it's a whole other thing entirely to work with Mexican businesses because it's different systems, it's different economies. The governments regulate things in different ways.
Hmm.
So that could be a bit of a con if you like want to come to Mexico and for example expand into Mexico or start a business in Mexico or maybe have a portion of your business in Mexico, it could be a little more challenging.
So to sum it up, it would be business and networking are probably not at the same level as you might be used to coming from the US, especially if you're in a big city like San Francisco, like Miami, like LA.
New York.
New York, you
Yeah.
might not have exactly the same opportunities for in-person networking. Granted, we do most of our business online, both the delivery and also the acquisition of clients, creation of content, things like that. So it almost doesn't matter where we physically are in the world. And we do spend a lot of time going back to the States. So we might be in the US for maybe a month out of the year or so total in order to do things like go to events there. We're actually going on something called the Marketers Cruise coming up in January. So because Mexico is so close to the US and there's a lot of direct flights, for instance, where we are at in Guadalajara, you can fly direct to Miami, you can fly direct to LA, to a lot of other places. It doesn't really matter as much because you can still go to a couple events a year and you're still saving so much money on rent and everything else. It still is worth it in my opinion.
Another con, and this actually has come up a lot in the expat groups on Facebook, is that investing in real estate is not as easy or as straightforward in Mexico. So, for example, interest rates here, first of all, if you can even get a mortgage in
Hmm.
Mexico, let's start
It's
there.
very
It's
difficult. There's a
very
lot of
difficult.
red tape. I think you have to be at least a temporary resident in most cases or a permanent resident, which I have my residency currently and Amanda's working on getting hers, but you need paperwork like that. You need a lot of bank statements. They're probably not going to accept any kind of business bank statements like they might in the US for certain types of loans. The interest rates,
The
we gotta
interest
talk
rates are
about
through
that.
the roof here. Like y'all Americans are complaining about interest
About
rates in the United.
8%,
You're
yeah.
complaining about like 6 or 8%. You're looking at like a 15
Hmm.
in Mexico, and I think that's for residents. I think it's more if you are a foreigner. Now, that
Yeah.
being said, right, we have learned because we decided to start talking to people about real estate just out of curiosity. We were meeting with real estate agents in Puerto Vallarta just for fun. And what we discovered, right, is if you have enough cash and if you can kind of keep the banks out of it, then it's a lot easier. So you do, what is it called when you do it directly with the owner and you kind of keep the banks out of it? What's that called?
Like seller financing.
Yeah, when,
It
yeah.
doesn't happen as much here, but certainly it's possible just to get private contracts like that. But yes, you really want to be paying if you're going to invest in Mexico, you likely want to be paying all cash. Not that you can't get a loan because there are American banks that will lend for Mexico. Not all of them. There's
That's a
special
newer thing.
programs.
Yeah, that's a newer
Yeah.
thing. We'll have somebody on to talk about that. That's a newer thing. That we're now American banks are making it, doing loans for Americans who want to invest overseas. It's a newer thing, though.
But be aware of the expensive interest rates because if you're going to tie up that much money in a property, unless you really, really, really want to own here, it might make sense instead to invest, let's say, in rental properties in the US and take that cash flow. We won't get into this too much in this video, but it might make more sense to take that cash flow from US rental income where you're getting much more of a return on your investment and then do something like rent here or save up money and then maybe buy a fixer-upper, buy a plot of land here and then have it built. Build it yourself, build it over time with contractors, whatever makes the most sense, because you're going to want to avoid that mortgage if at all possible. It just, the numbers don't always check
The
out.
math doesn't math in Mexico when it comes to stuff like that. And along the same vein, things like renting are more challenging or have more red tape in Mexico than perhaps the United States. So, in a lot of places in Mexico, you will need what's called un aval, I think.
Aval,
Aval.
yeah, or fiador, which
Or
is like somebody that co-signs for you on your lease that also has property here.
Yeah, which is absurd. What first of all, what most people who are Mexican probably don't have that, right? In their family or somebody who can do that. And a foreigner definitely isn't going to. Now there are ways around that. They could do what's called un contrato. I think it was called un contrato alternativo or something like that, which is like an alternative contract, and you just figure it out between you and the landlord and lawyers, and then you give more cash up front, and that you
Cash is king here.
cash is
That's the
king,
key. Yep.
right? Have the cash, and then you're able to kind of more easily move things along. When you went through this the last time with this house, we had the whole process done in like a week, but I know that with the last place that you had, it was not that quick.
That is true. The first time I rented an apartment here in Guadalajara, the person managing the apartment was actually family of a friend that I had already known down here in Guadalajara, and so we were able to do that alternative contract, but it took weeks. I think about 2 or 3 weeks total between the time that I saw the place and said I was interested and when we actually had the keys because they need to do like background checks and credit checks and get extra deposit and you're wiring thousands of dollars from the US to Mexico and then you gotta sometimes deal with like that, declining through your bank and then having to resend it and just all these other little details that sometimes take time. And so it's not as simple as you go walk into an apartment building in the US and they maybe do a credit check, you sign the lease and get the keys the same day with the deposit. Not quite like that here. There's a lot more paperwork because the laws are much more favorable towards tenants and people have been known to get apartments to squat in those apartments and not leave, not paying rent, or they would just destroy the entire thing, and then the landlord would barely have any recourse, and it would take months and months to evict the tenant. So that's one of the reasons that they've established such strict laws or customs for renting places. So it's just something to be aware of. You can definitely rent as an American in places like Guadalajara. Just expect to probably pay a little bit more, not having all those documents in hand, then you might expect that the market rate of the city is. They call it gringo pricing, but the reality is, because of the way that the legal system is structured here, those landlords are taking a much greater risk on you without all the necessary, paperwork and cosigner and everything else than they would be on someone that did have those things in place. So it kind of balances out. It's still a lot more affordable than in the States, but just something to be aware of. There is a little bit of red tape around the process.
And then, speaking of which, because this is definitely something we've learned recently, throughout this process, is building codes in Mexico are not like building codes in the US. Now, don't get me wrong, right? The buildings here are basically made of like pure concrete, particularly
Concrete and bricks,
concrete
pretty
and
much.
bricks.
Yep.
Particularly, I think there's areas in Mexico City specifically where like they do have pretty decent building code because of earthquakes. So that's not what we're talking about. Like these buildings are not going to fall down. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking more about like electrical and plumbing and things like that.
Tell them about everything that we found in the house with the electrical tape
You might
around the
be able to,
pipes.
yeah, so you might be able to explain it better than I can, but basically, this particular house that we're in right now, we found out was like wired backwards.
Literally backwards. They said that a different person laid the conduit and the wire than the person that connected the wires. So we would have like live electric lines running to the switch, and then the neutral back was actually or sorry, to the light, and then the neutral was the one that was on the switch, which means that anytime you tried to change a light bulb, you would get zapped. You would get zapped touching the fridge and the door at the same time, or just the door, or putting your hand anywhere near the breaker box, which didn't even have proper circuits. Like they had the neutral wires on the breakers instead of the live wires. I'm
Wait, I don't
still
want people to think that that's like normal for
well.
Mexico.
This was a
This
special
is like a
house for
special
sure.
house and a
It's
special
wired
case for
very
sure.
backwards, but there's a lot of places here probably wired backwards.
Yeah.
Realistically, like there isn't a lot. The idea that somebody actually comes and inspects a house after it's built, I think maybe legally that is what happens in theory, but it doesn't seem like that possibly could happen in execution because we've seen so many things like the house being wired pretty much backwards. There was no ground, which understandably it's an old house. They didn't have that in the code at all at the time, so we ended up having to put our own ground wire in, which is a lot harder to do in concrete than it is in drywall. Take it from us. It was a multi-week project at this point, but things like that, the plumbing, we had to make several fixes ourselves because, as we mentioned earlier, you're waiting around for plumbers for days sometimes or weeks, and so we ended up having to learn some plumbing ourselves. Uh, there was literally a pipe, like a drain pipe, on our sink underneath the bathroom sink that was fixed with glue, and then the glue failed, and then somebody put electrical tape around it to just kind of make it hang on there. And then when another plumber came and actually
Mexicans have
changed
a word for that. It's called mexicanada.
Mexicanadas, yeah.
Mexicanadas. And it's basically like a quick fix because you need it to work now, but it didn't actually fix the thing.
But when you have so many Mexicanadas stacked on top of one
Yes.
another, it doesn't end well for any of those involved. Like when they went to change the faucet on our sink, they had to take the entire thing off. They had to cut the pipes at the bottom. And then, of course, when they did that, the little electrical tape that was barely holding the drain pipe uh, came off, and we were left with a fountain of water underneath our sink, and that wasn't great. So we had to get that fixed and have it done right. So there's little things like that you
Well,
want to
that
look
being
out.
said, this is a bit of a pro, right? Well, pro and a tip, right? So, pro is labor costs are a lot cheaper in Mexico than in the United States. So, we're going to go add that to the pro list.
Yep.
Because to get this whole house rewired was less than 1,000 USD, whereas in the US it easily would have been $15,000 to $20,000. So labor costs are much cheaper here. We'll put that in the pro column. And also a tip. I think a great place to end it is this particular tip. Yes, it's more difficult to get your hands on contractors and people who show up on time and stuff like that. We found a trick. We found a hack. And the hack is if you go into all the groups on Facebook with American expats in them, or European expats, or Canadian expats, and you ask for referrals.
Hmm.
That's the hack.
To cleaning ladies, to
Cleaning ladies,
electricians, plumbers.
electricians,
Yeah.
plumbers, because when we did that, we were able to find people who like showed up on time and did really, really good work.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's the best place to end it is with that tip. These are the pros and cons. We say it on this channel all the time. There's no such thing as a perfect country. A lot of times you just have to do what kind of works for you. And
We
for
love it here, though.
yeah,
I
no,
mean,
I
I
love it.
I I think for us, the pros very far outweigh the cons because the cons are more inconveniences, but the pros are really like a different lifestyle.
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
different accessibility of that lifestyle.
Yeah, and at this stage in our lives, that works. In 5 years, we might be looking for something else. Who knows? But that's the beauty of all of this is, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, those choices are in your hands.
Yeah.
You make your own money, take care of your own time, so you have more of those options and those choices so that if you change your mind in 3 or 4 years, well, there's probably another country you can go to.
And if you build your business in the right way, if you build the right kinds of systems, like what we teach in our different programs, like Effortless Sales Engine, and Amanda's program that's been around for a while called Persuade to Profit, where we talk about the sales strategies behind all that. When you set up those systems in the right way, it doesn't really matter what the pros and cons of a particular country are now, because those could also change in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months. You never really know. But if you have the systems in the right place, built in the right way from the beginning, then you don't need to worry about being tied to one particular country or economy or anything else. You're able to move around freely. You have the money and the resources and the documentation to be able to go and acquire residencies and passports in different countries, which is exactly what we're doing. And everything is just much easier. So it's important to build those things, that the structure underneath your life and your business from the beginning, so that you have the flexibility to live and work wherever you want.
And if you're interested in that, we will have information in the description and in the show notes so you can get started on your own journey with that. But that's all we got for now. We will see you guys on the next episode. If you're watching this on YouTube and you liked it, go ahead and give it a like, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. Our goal is to get this in front of 1 million expats. We want to connect 1 million expats and aspiring expats globally, and we need your help to do that. So every time you leave us a link, a like, a comment, a share, it helps us with that mission. Thank you so much for being here and giving us your time, and we will see you on the next one.
Bye.